Alexander de Croo, United Nations Development Programme Administrator, welcome. Thank you for joining us on Euronews.
My pleasure.
Now, your agency has recently put out a report warning that military escalation in the Middle East could push more than 30 million people into poverty. What has the UNDP, your agency, what has the response been in the region?
First of all, people agree because typically governments of the region feel this on a daily basis. How increasing energy prices, but especially also disruptions in the food systems, have a thorough impact on the daily lives of their populations. But not only in the region, and this is one of the elements that we want to emphasize in our report, is that the impact goes way beyond the region. For example, sub-Saharan Africa is severely impacted by what is going on in the region. Small island states, for example, in the Pacific, you start to have a few islands that just don't have enough fuel anymore. So the impact of the war and the blockade that is linked to it has a deep impact. And it shows that war is development in reverse. It takes decades to lift people out of poverty. It takes 6 weeks of war to push them back into poverty.
So wide-ranging repercussions, as you're saying there. Are you confident that a diplomatic solution can be found between the US and Iran? Because we're obviously seeing now in the Strait of Hormuz these blockades, which is making the conflicts more confusing.
Am I confident? I have no crystal ball. Am I hopeful? Yes. And that, of course, is the first measure, is to stop the war, or at least come to some type of normalization of the shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz. But even if the war would stop today, you will need economic interventions to avoid that whole countries and whole populations are being pushed back in poverty in a structural way. And this is what we explain in our report, is that these type of interventions are typically, it's macroeconomic interventions that international financial institutions can do on, for example, providing targeted and time-limited cash outs to populations who are impacted, or providing free access to fuel, cooking gas, and so on. If you don't do these targeted, timely macroeconomic interventions, you will have many more ripple effects. And we have not talked about the ripple effects of poverty, of food insecurity. That could lead to additional conflicts, that could lead to more displacement and migration flows, that could lead to other types of extremism. So there is a need for interventions beyond just trying to have an agreement and stopping the hostilities.
And now one of the countries that's heavily impacted by this crisis is Lebanon, where around 1.2 million people are displaced. Now, we just heard the news that there is this 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. How dire is the situation in the country, and how necessary is this ceasefire?
Oh, it is very necessary. We're talking about hundreds, thousands of people that are being displaced or that are leaving Lebanon, and, for example, leaving Lebanon to Syria, which is, remarkable, knowing that in the past decades it has been the opposite. Look, there's multiple dimensions to it. First element is, these interventions are in disregard of international humanitarian law. The human loss is massive, but also the material loss is massive. And I think that, Lebanon, the international community has invested so much in stabilizing the country, in providing hospitals, schools, and other type of infrastructure. All that is now being blown up. This is people's taxes that are just being blown up in military action. This is just, as I said, development in reverse. And so a ceasefire, that's a good thing. We can only hope that it is really a ceasefire and not a diminishment of fire, as we've seen, for example, in Gaza. But we will have to deal with the consequences of what has happened over the past weeks in having hundreds of thousands of people who are displaced, who lost their homes, who lost their livelihoods, and immediately getting into a logic of stabilization, recovery, and rebuilding is the right thing to do. I mean, people don't need necessarily handouts and food. They need someone who is willing to help them in reconstructing their lives.
And you're obviously part of the UN, an institution which has been heavily criticized recently. The US, by the US president, for example, there are fears that his board of peace could replace it. What does the UN bring to the table in this geopolitical context that we're facing now?
Well, I think, first of all, respect for international rules. And I think we see what happens when international rules are not being respected. Secondly, I think we bring trust. In that part of the world, people know what we stand for. I mean, we are there to help them. We are there to reconstruct their country, and we have multiple UN organizations that, despite the criticism, and I'm not deaf for the criticism, are very, very much appreciated by the populations with whom we work. Now, the key element for us is to have access. For example, in Gaza, which is a really desolate place these days, more than 85% of people have lost their homes and are living in the middle of the rubble in tents that not even worth the name of being a tent. We can help many more people. We can provide way more assistance, but we're not getting the access. We're not getting the possibility of bringing in goods. We're not getting the possibility of getting in technical equipment. I have no problem confronting the criticism to the UN. My attitude would be, game on, let us show what we're capable of, but then also give us the room to do so. For the moment, there's no access for UN organizations, but no one else is doing it. I'm open to work together with the Board of Peace. I think the Board of Peace is based on a Security Council resolution. It has helped in bringing a ceasefire or the diminishment of fire in Gaza. These are good things. I mean, these are realizations of the U.S. administration. But now we need to move into the next phase, and moving into that next phase really is urgent in helping people to reconstruct their lives.
But just to touch on that UN Security Council that you mentioned, a lot of the criticism has touched on the fact that you have this veto mechanism here, which is in fact systemically blocking the UN from solving conflicts. How do you tackle that?
Look, these are the rules today. And we can have a lot of philosophical reflections on those rules. I would just make it more practical. The 5 permanent members of the Security Council have an incredible power, which is their veto. But to me, power always goes together with responsibility. That power also gives you a lot of responsibility and understanding that a stable world really is to the benefit of everyone. And we've seen over the past years the instability increasing in a dramatic way. And that's not a good thing for anyone. It's not a good thing for the people living there. But we also see the economic consequences of this. I mean, the IMF came out with their new predictions 2 days ago. I mean, they decreased worldwide growth rates by 0.3%. That's huge. I mean, this is costing jobs throughout the world. This is costing prosperity throughout the world. This is just, I mean, due to human activity, we're just shooting in our own foot. And that's worldwide. The reduction in growth rate for the Arab region is -3%. I mean, this is really, really impacting, as you said in your introduction, more than 30 million people. Now, the good thing with human action is that human action is reversible. So we can only plead for intervention and for making clear that what is happening right now has quite some impact. And if we want to avoid it, it has a structural impact. We need to intervene with some macroeconomic measures.
And now just finally to close, I want to go a bit closer to home. I want to turn to the elections in Hungary. Now, obviously, you were Belgian Prime Minister between 2020 and 2025, so you often shared a seat at the table with Viktor Orban, the now outgoing Prime Minister. What do you think the victory of the TISA party means for Europe? And maybe more importantly, what does it mean for Ukraine, where your agency is very active?
Look, I'm not going to comment on European politics. I mean, we don't take political positions. What is important to us, and this is a big part of our work, is organizing elections and making sure that you have a political representation in a country which is fair and which is representative. And to me, the Hungarian election shows that elections do matter. And that despite anything that sometimes people do to make elections less powerful in the impact that it can have, here it's quite clear that if people have a certain position, elections do have an impact. Now, we will have to see what that means. I mean, we have no position on one person or another person in a certain country. Of course, if the position of a country is to support multilateralism and to support the idea that countries are stronger when they work together, we're happy with that. But we will try to work with anyone. But to me, the main message is elections do work and elections do have an impact.
Mr. Alexander De Croo, thank you so much for joining us on Euronews.
My pleasure.